Well, good morning, everyone. It was I, once again, Raging Randall, and I'm here today to bring to you yet another chapter of Brian Burroughs' Days of Rage. We left off discussing the Weatherman's turn to a more quote-unquote responsible form of terrorism. This, however, will be something slightly different. This is getting into the interactions between the Weather Underground terrorist group and the FBI. So without further ado, we'll get into it. The Wrong Side of History. Weatherman and the FBI, October 1970 to April 1971. Hundreds of anonymous tips flowed into FBI offices after the October bombings, most of them spurious, as with the caller who claimed that Weatherman was planning to steal biological weapons from the Army's Fort Detrick in Maryland and poison a major city's water supply. I mean, it's just so hilarious how the claims that communists were stealing, CBRN weapons and poisoning wells. I mean, just an incredibly hilarious observation there. I mean, certainly some communist types in the 1940s are alleged by Sean McMeekin to have stolen nuclear material from the Army's refining factory. Anyway, it's just funny how the collective conscious just sees these things, notices them, even if it's not like specifically true to the individuals discussed here. Anyway, the attacks put enormous pressure on the FBI to make arrests, but while any number of radicals were detained that autumn, none were Weathermen. It was, in fact, a wildly uneven manhunt. The group was a top priority for the New York, Chicago, and San Francisco offices, but despite all the demands and directives from headquarters, a number of FBI stations had simply refused to form Weatherman squads, seeing no pressing local need. When Wesley Swearingen, a veteran agent involved in both the Sam Melville and Townhouse investigations, was transferred from New York to Los Angeles that spring, he was asked to be assigned to the Weatherman squad. He was told there wasn't one. "Wes, you don't understand," a supervisor told him. "There are no Weathermen in Los Angeles." Almost immediately, however, Swearingen found one. The owner of a construction supply store in Tucson had called police, suspicious of a young man to whom he had sold 50 pounds of dynamite. The man had showed a California driver's license in the name of William Allen Friedman. When another agent showed it to Swearingen, he recognized the photo as John Furst, the Columbia SDSer who had headed to the Cleveland Collective until fleeing the townhouse after the townhouse. Swearingen traced William Friedman to an address in the beachside town of Venice, California, swiftly identifying 5 other radicals at the same address. "Hell," Swearingen said, "these are Weathermen." Reluctantly, the Los Angeles FBI office formed a Weatherman squad. Furst had vanished, but Swearingen alone eventually opened more than 200 wiretaps. When these found little to prove that the remaining 5 radicals in Venice were Weathermen, they apparently weren't, Swearingen and other agents followed in Squad 47's footsteps and began breaking into the homes and offices of their friends. The first investigation opened a new front in the government's pursuit of Weathermen. It was led by a sharply dressed Washington lawyer named Guy L. Goodwin. As the newly named chief of the Justice Department's Special Litigation Service of the Internal Security and Criminal Division, Goodwin would become Weatherman's own Inspector Javert, a relentless prosecutor who used grand juries to terrorize, his critics charged, just about anyone ever linked to the group. The syndicated columnist Jack Anderson termed him President Nixon's witchfinder general. In fact, Goodwin was a liberal Democrat who was deeply opposed to the Vietnam War and secretly disdainful of the Nixon administration. But he put his job first. In time, acting as a kind of traveling prosecutor, he would convene more than a dozen grand juries across the country, remaining calm and professional even in the face of the angriest weather supporters. Once, when demonstrators pelted him with urine and oil outside a Seattle courthouse, Goodwin shrugged and told an associate, "Calm down, kids will be kids." So, what a highly stoic attitude from this guy. In one of his first grand juries, Goodwin subpoenaed the first 5 Venice suspects to testify in Tucson. The only concrete evidence he could muster was the fact that Forrest had used one of their cars. When all refused to testify, Goodwin had them jailed for contempt. In the meantime, Wes Swearingen and other Los Angeles agents burglarized all their new residences and then the homes of 4 of their attorneys. No usable evidence was ever found. When the grand jury expired 6 months later, the Tucson Five, as they were known by then, were freed. I mean, every single time the left has like a collection of people that have some sort of police action taken against them, they always call them as a group, don't they? Tucson Five, Central Park 5, or Central Park 7, or whatever it is. Like, every single time they do this. Goodwin subpoenaed them once more. Facing 18 more months in jail, 3 testified. Cited for contempt, another appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, which reversed the citation. First was eventually indicted, but never captured. Many years later, he turned himself in to authorities in Tucson. The case was dismissed. Guy Goodwin, however, was just getting started. After the October bombings, Weatherman's leadership gathered for a post-mortem in New York. It was probably the first time all 4 of its members, along with its soon-to-be-named 5th, Eleanor Stein, had been in one place since Flint. It had been an incredible 6 months since Mendocino, a period in which they had managed to rebuild the organization, perfect a safer bomb design, and launch a sharply different kind of nationwide bombing campaign from the one J.J. and Terry Robbins and many other weathermen had envisioned. Everyone was exhausted. They needed time to rest, regroup, and plan. Good morning, Rotronis. How you doing? Along with members of the New York cell, the leaders rented a house near the beach in Hampton Bays, toward the eastern end of Long Island. Jeff Jones passed out the last of the California acid and led everyone in gathering seashells. On Thanksgiving, Stein cooked a turkey while the men played touch football. In the evenings, they smoked pot, listened to Bob Dylan's new album, New Morning, and tried to take stock of everything that had happened in the 8 frenetic months since the townhouse. They had achieved so much. They had struck at the government in 6 cities. No one had been hurt. No one had been arrested. Yet for all they had achieved, it was hard to argue that Weatherman had done much to further the underground cause. They had imagined they would be an intellectual vanguard whose actions would draw others into the underground and trigger the revolution they wanted so badly. But it wasn't happening. Major protest bombings were on the rise, it was true. By one count, there were 330 in 1970, almost one a day, more than 3 times the number reported in 1969. Almost all, however, like the one in Madison, appeared the work of one-off student rage. No significant underground groups had formed. And while Weatherman retained real prestige as the heavy edge of the New Left, the Madison bombing had done incalculable damage to the group's cause, at once repelling would-be allies and demonstrating the public tolerance of radical violence was on the wane. In a Gallup poll that winter, only 8% of college students surveyed expressed a highly favorable view of Weatherman, while 47% had a highly unfavorable view, 1 point less than for the ultra-conservative John Birch Society. Weatherman itself, while operational, was far smaller than it had been before the townhouse. By Thanksgiving, it probably had less than 50 active members, perhaps as few as 30. Change was in the air. You could see it on the streets. The media, from Time to the Saturday Evening Post, was calling it a revolution, but it was not at all the revolution Weatherman expected. Everyone called it something different. The Age of Aquarius, Woodstock Nation, Alternative Society, the Counterculture. After 5 years of scoffing and hand-wringing at the riotous change in its children, much of mainstream America had begun to embrace it. The drugs, the music, the long hair, the bell-bottom pants, the distaste for authority. A best-selling book that winter, The Greening of America, by The Greening of America. Is that like the browning of America? By a Yale professor named Charles Reich, announced it loud and clear. There is a revolution coming. It will not be like revolutions of the past. It will originate with the individual and with culture, and it will change the political structure only as its final act. It will not require violence to succeed, and it cannot be successfully resisted by violence. This is a revolution of the new generation. Their protest and rebellion, their culture, clothes, music, drugs, and liberated lifestyle. Again, culture follows law here. And this is an interesting point as well for us. Changing the political structure comes really at the last second, as the last act of any sort of movement. The political structure seems to be highly resistant to these changes, and it's one reason why I tell people to focus on meta-politics rather than the day-to-day of politics. I mean, I don't neglect politics, but there's a reason why change starts within or with you, as they say. It was true. America, it turned out, had fallen in love with everything about this groovy new counterculture, except its politics. Those like Weatherman who had predicted a revolution in America ended up being half right. A revolution was arriving, but it was a cultural rather than a political phenomenon. It was the height of irony. Much of America wanted to dress like Bernardine Dorn, smoke pot like Bernardine Dorn, and listen to Bernardine Dorn's music, but it honestly didn't want to hear a word she had to say. Unfortunately for mainstream America, Bernardine Dorn and her cultural changes that she espoused can't be separated. This is very clear over time. The movement had preached endlessly about freedom, to dress as you like, eat what you like, smoke what you like, you can do what you want, was the famous line from the 1971 movie Harold and Maude. As these new values seeped into the American mindset during 1970, 71, and 72, it turned out that what most Americans wanted to do was focus not on politics, and certainly not on overthrowing the government, but on themselves. It was the dawning of what Tom Wolfe called the Me Decade. Terry H. Anderson gives this vivid portrait of its beginnings circa 1971. Liberal cities turned exotic as freaks and ethnics created a hip cultural renaissance. Street art flourished. Color flooded the nation. I mean, really, has color not flooded the nation since the 1965 Hart-Celler Act? Chicanos painted murals at high schools and walls of fire on buildings. Black men wore jumbo afros and the women sported vivid African dress. Young men with shaved heads and robes beat tambourines and chanted on corners, Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hip capitalists invaded the streets, setting up shops. Artisans wearing bandanas and bell-bottoms sold jewelry, bells, and leather. As sunlight streamed through cut glass, communards in ragged bib overalls sold loaves of whole wheat bread at co-ops and organically grown vegetables at farmers markets. Freak flags flew, curling, waving across America. Carpenters wearing ponytails moved into decaying neighborhoods, paint and lumber in hand, and began urban homesteading. Long hairs blew bubbles or lofted frisbees in the park. Tribes of young men and women skinny dipped at beaches and hippie hollows. I mean, this is such an interesting picture because it reminds me of the way some things are going on the online right, where everybody is now shilling product or trying to sell product. And then you've got this massive cultural change where people are, the raw nationalist line, I must live a certain way. People moving into certain areas in the countryside, trying to get away from the cultural changes that the left enshrined in the cities. It's very interesting. I mean, there's definitely something to be said and parallels to be made given the positionality of the modern e-right and the far left here. It's very interesting. As like just a revisionist commentary, it makes you wonder about some things, about whether or not a more mustache man type social revolution could even happen in the United States or in the Anglo world generally. The irony was that even as Middle America adopted the movement's look and feel, the movement itself was slowly coming apart. In part, it was due to the dawning realization that demonstrations alone would never end the war or influence the White House. Nixon had started his Vietnamization of the war. American soldiers had begun streaming home. Suddenly, protesting the war didn't seem so urgent. Thousands of young people were giving up politics, many of them flocking to the hippie communes springing up all over the United States. By 1971, the Associated Press estimated 3,000 communes had opened, taking in 3 million people. But the real problem was that the movement had become a victim of its own success. By empowering women, it created the women's liberation movement. By calling out corporate polluters, it helped spawn the modern environmental movement. In the countercultural mainstreaming of 1970, 71, and 72, these two causes and many others exploded into the national consciousness, diverting the attentions of many who had built their lives around protesting the war and racism. This shift was symbolized by the decision at Rat, the underground paper where Sam Melville's girlfriend, Jane Alpert, once worked, to give up coverage of the revolution altogether and focus exclusively on women's issues. Right. So this is basically saying even the radicals have to abide by what the cultural norms of the age are. Right. They're not, and they understand very well that the revolution, as a communist violent one, isn't popular, and nobody wants to do that. That takes real work, But it also underlies their success because basically every issue that Burroughs has listed here, these people have achieved almost everything that they wanted. The past 2 years haven't been good for anyone, and on balance, they haven't been good for the left at all. The writer David Horowitz observed that winter. The main motion is in other directions, towards new lifestyles rather than new constituencies, toward political communes and collectives rather than parties and coalitions, toward underground violence rather than above-ground organizing. Right, but this is controlling space and controlling the streets and localities. So they've already achieved the cultural turn. Now this is about ensuring that you have control of the metapolitics at local level. Sipping coffee in the mornings at Hampton's Bays, Dorn and the others sensed they might be sliding toward the wrong side of history. I mean, this is the great fear of the left, isn't it? Oh, we can never be on the wrong side of history, otherwise we are condemned. Oh dear, oh me, oh my. They had achieved much, they agreed, but they had made mistakes, and not just at the townhouse. They had led a bonsai charge, and no one had followed. They had been stunningly arrogant and dismissive of their critics. Worst of all, they had walked away from their only source of real power. the vast network of SDS, now in ruins. Without SDS, they had no power. Without SDS, they were isolated. They were alone. By then, the question was becoming, why are we doing this? Recalls Bryan Flanagan. People started saying it was a mistake jettisoning SDS, and it clearly was. Then, once you took real violence off the table, once you said we weren't going to kill policemen, what were we going to do? Blow up bathrooms for the rest of our lives? I mean, that's a criticism of other groups towards Weatherman, really, especially the Black liberation types who are extremely violent. They had burned too many bridges, and they knew it. That winter, for the first time, some of their above-ground allies began openly appealing for support from the rest of the movement, something the leadership had never thought would be necessary. Returning from a trip to Algiers, Jennifer Dorn made clear that Weatherman couldn't bring about a revolution on his own. Why is she going to Algiers? Like, yeah, you understand that Morocco is a huge hotbed of leftism during this time because of the Moroccan Revolution against the French colonial stuff, but like, sorry. Sorry, not Morocco, it's Algeria, my bad. But like, why is she going to Algeria? Like, why? Right, and this is kind of a similar pattern too, and I'm confusing this now because some of the other figures in these movements had, especially the Black Liberation Army figures, went to Morocco instead of Algiers. So it just makes me wonder, why do they all go to North Africa? Like, why? What logistical or reason do they have to make a trip over there? It doesn't make sense to me. It's a question that needs to get answered, I think. It just makes me wonder, this is a sworn revolutionary communist, a half-Jewish revolutionary communist who is probably meeting some kind of Soviet intelligence or other kind of intelligence asset in Algiers. That's probably what she's doing, especially if she's going alone. Let's see, where was I? Yes. Revolution, she told the Liberated Guardian, means moving on all different kinds of levels. If they're doing a bombing, well, then we should be planning how we're going to be out on the street in support, not how we should be doing a bombing too. To coordinate stuff moves so many more people, and it's really a way of increasing our strength, building solidarity among us. Yeah, again, this is multiple axes of attack here. That's what she's doing. A more plaintive note was struck by two imprisoned Weather women, Linda Evans and Judy Clark, who released a letter from Chicago jail in which they appealed to their fellow radicals not to forget Weatherman. I wonder how many old friends of people who are underground think to talk about them with people, Clark wrote. Think how effective it would be in making those underground figures into real life and blood people, massifying that understanding so that more and more people can develop a consciousness about aiding and abetting fugitives, developing their own sense of security, breaking down that feeling of separateness between underground and overground. Evans added, this makes them real people, not superstar myths. People don't seem to understand how important the creation of the underground is to the future of the struggle, how important it is for all of us to help them survive, support them totally, openly when they have the misfortune to get caught, talk with friends about ways they survive, ways we can help them, just to make the whole thing more real than visions of people hiding in basements, putting on wigs occasionally to carry a bomb into a building. Superstar myths, hiding in basements. 8 months after the townhouse, that's what they had become. Somehow, Dorn knew they had to begin to rebuild all those bridges, make themselves real again to the movement. They started writing in the mornings after coffee, all of them contributing to the essay they decided to call, in another nod to Dylan, New Morning, Changing Weather. It was the longest and most mature document they had produced to date. Gone was much of the hippy-dippy youth culture jargon that came to be associated with Jeff Jones and Bill Ayers. In its place was something they had never tried before: genuine humility, infused into a sober accounting of Weatherman's first year. The tone came to be identified with Dorn. When New Morning was released, on December 6th, 1970, only her signature was appended. Right, so this is very interesting because it really strikes a massive note about the realities of life in the underground and what they need and what they want. And I see a lot of people, again, to make parallels on the so-called dissonant right between these people and us, and they're very they're not hard parallels to draw here. They want support, they want money, they want protection from their enemies, and especially in terms of when these people, they go to prison, but people in our circles tend to get doxxed instead of just going to prison. That's like, well, some people do go to prison, but that's a different story. But the fears are the same, right? The processes are the same. That's the point I'm trying to hammer home here. Good morning, Dai Shaddai. New Morning was a stark admission not only of Weatherman's failure to draw others into revolutionary violence, but of how thoroughly the world had moved away from its tactics in just a year. It has been 9 months since the townhouse explosion, it read. In that time, the future of our revolution has changed decisively. Weatherman, too, needed to change, the statement went on, in language that represented a sharp reversal from communiques issued as recently as that September. It rejected almost everything Weatherman had represented up to the townhouse, admitting that the townhouse forever destroyed our belief that armed struggle is the only real revolutionary struggle. It acknowledged its military error and apologized not only for its technical inexperience, but for a tendency to consider only bombings or picking up the gun as revolutionary. With the glorification of the heavier the better, gone were the calls for supporting black revolutionaries. In their place were more attempts to reach out to hippies and freaks, announcing that grass and organic consciousness expanding drugs were now weapons of the revolution. Dorn even changed the name of the group, rejecting Weatherman as sexist. They would now be called the Weather Underground. Right, so this is the first time you can see the more feminine turn really taking hold in the left. The masculine figures like Bill Ayers and Jeff Jones, among some of the others, Fliegelman, they've been replaced as the leadership, right? This is like watching the great replacement happen to the left. I mean, you have a feminine leader who is now basically in charge of setting the tone. And, well, what is she doing? She's still saying, oh, well, we need to, like, when she says, oh, freaks, who does that mean in modern terms, right? That means, like, the rainbow pride people. That's who that means, right? This is not hard to parse. You just change the terminology ever so slightly. And it's very interesting, too, because they come to one single violent act, and it doesn't go well, and they lose friends, and they realize, oh, this isn't for me, right? Oh. Like, these people have no stomach, right? What do these people think they were getting into? Anyway. New Morning drew criticism from a number of leading radicals, none more important than the Panther 21, the group of New York Black Panthers still engaged in a mass conspiracy trial. The 21 issued an open letter criticizing Weather's retreat from revolutionary violence, as well as its unwillingness to raise money or help the jailed Panthers in any significant way. Man, even in the radical circles, they all just want Gibbs. The letter put Weather's leadership in a delicate position. Everyone knew what many Panthers wanted to do: kill policemen, the exact strategy Weather had now disavowed. The 21's letter, in effect, forced Weather to publicly choose between its old principles and those it would now embrace, supporting black revolutionaries or renouncing deadly violence. In the end, in a decision that came back to haunt everyone involved, Dorn decided to take what many saw as the coward's way out. The leadership responded to the 21 with complete silence. They said nothing. That right there is the moment when they abandoned the blacks, abandoned everything they ever said about helping the blacks. And we all knew it, says one radical attorney of the period. Bernardine, Billy, that pretty boy, Jeff Jones, all of them. They decided they didn't want to die. They didn't want to go to jail. So they walked out on everything they believed so they could stay free and stay alive. Well, that's very interesting because it's not like they stopped bombing anything. After New Morning, the New York leadership returned to their apartment on Amity Street in Brooklyn, the others to San Francisco. It was around this time, it appears, that Dorn, Jones, and Ayres abandoned their Sausalito houseboat for a modern gated home in the waterside suburb of Tiburon. At least two friends remember visiting them there. They were living in a big, glamorous house in Tiburon with a beautiful deck, 4 bedrooms, totally empty, recalls John Lerner. I remember I walked into the kitchen, and someone looked outside and noticed an unmarked panel van across the street. The 3 of them panicked and said, "Let's get out of here," and so we packed them up and left. I assume they went back at some point. It was a false alarm. The Tiburon house symbolized a dichotomy that was beginning to trouble many in Weather's lower ranks. While leadership lived in a waterfront home, their followers, many still huddled in a single apartment on Pine Street in San Francisco, were living on the edge of poverty. The resentment would grow in the coming months. They wouldn't let us have jobs, you know. They would give us $20 now and then, says Kathy Wilkerson, who remains resentful 40 years later. In time, the difference between the top and the bottom became really gross. Offensive. Their position was that if you wanted money, you should raise money. Well, most of us couldn't do that. They would go to good restaurants that we could not afford. If we went with them, we had to pay for ourselves unless business was discussed, and they would pay. One Weather alumnus remembers visiting Bill Ayres and opening the refrigerator to find a stick of butter. "Butter," he exclaims today. "I couldn't afford a piece of bread, and they had butter." Ayres' brother Rick was especially incensed. At one point, while underground in Los Angeles, he was so poor he lived for months in a tent in a city park. They never seemed to have jobs, he recalled. They lived off radical lawyers and moneyed friends who told them what they wanted to hear. What courageous revolutionaries they were, while all the rest of us did the shit work and went around blowing things up to maintain their reputations. While some of us were dangerously poor, they always ate good food and they always slept between clean sheets. Sorry, can't talk right now. Require more coffee. For the leadership, at least, life was good. So good that worries of complacency set in. There were a lot of people who were getting sloppy. Their IDs were bad, their wigs were bad, their hair dye was bad, remembers Rick Ayres, who warned his brother that they were taking too many chances. I was a stickler. I recall I really thought they were getting sloppy in San Francisco, and I told them so. You know, it just makes me wonder, speaking of the necessity of wearing wigs and hair dye, those Antifa pictures that get passed around sometimes, and every single one of them has like purple or weird colored hair or shaved head. Everybody's seen those pictures, right? It makes me wonder, like in modern terms, if culturally that's a residue of some of these practices and the necessity of having to dye one's hair a different color. It makes me wonder. Rick's concern rose that winter when, during a single 2-month period, a number of weathermen survived encounters with their FBI pursuers. The first was Rick Ayers himself, who was then living in a remote farmhouse north of Seattle. His girlfriends had given birth that summer. And at one point, the couple crossed into Canada to register their daughter under their real names in Vancouver. Not long after, their landlord's teenage son warned them that federal agents had arrived to arrest them. "We were gone within an hour," Ayers recalls. "We lost the car and everything else. Apparently, we had been photographed at the Vancouver train station, and it had taken them months to find us." It was after this episode that Ayers relocated to Los Angeles. Yeah, again, the idea that there was no weatherman living in LA was ridiculous. The second incident involved one of Weather's young attorneys, a Harvard graduate named Donald Stang. On January 22nd, 1971, security guards at the Standard Oil building on Bush Street in San Francisco discovered Stang in an 11th floor wet restroom. Over his head, they saw he had unscrewed a ceiling vent. When police were called, they found he was carrying a diagram of what appeared to be the building's heating system. With no evidence of any crime, Stang was not arrested, but the FBI clearly believed he was scouting a location to be bombed. There's a footnote for this paragraph. It says, reached at his Oakland area home in 2013, Stang declined to discuss the incident, saying it was all a misunderstanding. Yeah, sure. Sure. By far the most dangerous encounter occurred a month earlier, on December 16th, on Manhattan's East Side. Bill Ayers and several others, including Ron Fliegelman, decided to take in a movie at a theater on East 68th Street, which happened to be around the corner from the FBI's New York offices. Fliegelman was with his new girlfriend, Judy Clark. As luck would have it, an FBI agent passing the theater recognized Clark as she walked inside. I mean, what a stroke of luck that you're literally just walking past a random movie theater and you see like an open weatherman walking around. Just what a coincidence, you know. There were 4 or 5 of us in the theater, recalls Fliegelman. We knew something was wrong. Someone in front of us was looking back at us. I remember somebody came back and asked Judy who she was, then asked her to come back with them. At the back, she ran, and they had to run after her. There was an emergency exit by the screen, and we all went to that and got away. It was close. Even as Clark broke into a run, her FBI pursuers watched in amazement as she pulled out a notebook and actually began eating its pages. When we caught her, oh, God, she was kicking and screaming and spitting at us, recalls Dawn Shackelford, a Squad 47 agent who helped make the arrest. She called us every name in the book. Clark, who was wanted on charges connected with the Days of Rage, would eventually be sentenced to 9 months in the Cook County Jail, serve 4, and resume a long and colorful career helping underground groups. While she told the FBI nothing of value, her arrest had immediate repercussions. When agents examined her driver's license, they found it was in the name of a long-dead infant named Yvette Kirby, the first inkling the Bureau received that this was how Weather was building its false identities. On December 21st, 5 days after her capture, the FBI's San Francisco office dispatched a team of agents to the San Francisco Department of Health to begin examining all dead infant birth certificates from the 1940s that had been issued during the previous year, paying close attention to those issued between January and April, when Weather cadres were first arriving in the Bay Area. It took a dozen agents 6 weeks to complete the search, but when they did, they suspected they had hit pay dirt. 27 birth certificates had been issued. Cross-indexing these names with driver's licenses issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles, They found that 18 of these long dead infants had been issued new driver's licenses in the past year. All they suspected were Weathermen. Studying the license photos and signatures, the agents tentatively identified at least a dozen Weathermen, including Mark Rudd and Kathy Boudin. The real find, though, came when they examined a license issued on March 13, 1970, a week after the townhouse, to a woman named Lorraine Ann Jenkins. The baby by that name had been born in 1944 and died days later. Jellins was a dead ringer for Bernadine Dorn. The signature matched. Checking motor vehicle registrations, they found that Lorraine Jellins had registered a 1954 Chevrolet pickup truck. It was Jeff Jones's beloved Susie Q. The truck had been issued parking tickets in Sausalito in May and in San Francisco in September. An arrest warrant for the unpaid tickets was immediately issued. Best of all, the FBI found an address in San Francisco. The owner was listed as a young doctor. The doctor and his home were put under surveillance, but the Bureau wasn't willing to wait. According to FBI memoranda, a highly confidential source was identified at the doctor's on February 27th, meaning the FBI broke into the apartment. Inside, they found a driver's license that had been issued to Norman Kenneth Bailey. The photo was of Jeff Jones. They also found a bill indicating that Lorraine Jellins had been examined at St. Francis Memorial Hospital on January 28th, a month earlier. Checking hospital records, agents discovered a Dr. Robert E. Shapiro had seen Jellins at 11:15 that morning. The previous appointment at 11 had been for Eleanor Kennedy, Michael Kennedy's wife. Jellins was Dorn. There was no doubt. An area-wide alert was issued for Jones's truck. Neither Jones nor Dorn, however, was found. As luck would have it, they were at that very moment in Washington, D.C. The next day, they bombed the U.S. Capitol. Yeah, I mean, this reminds us of the earlier incident where, with Kathy Wilkerson or one of her entourage, where basically the way that these people get caught is by hospital records, essentially. It's very interesting. The Capitol bombing on March 1st, 1971, was the rare Weatherman action in which all, or almost all, the leadership gathered to take part. Ron Fliegelman believes he built the bomb, though his memory is hazy. Security in the building at the time was all but non-existent. A visitor's bags weren't searched, and there were no metal detectors. According to several sources, Bernadine Dorn and Kathy Boudin simply left the bomb behind a toilet in a first-floor men's room on the Senate side of the building. According to an account Jeff Jones gave years later, it failed to explode, forcing a second team of Weathermen to sneak back inside and rearm it. I mean, can you imagine having to go back in and, rearm a live explosive? Complete amateur hour. I wouldn't fucking do that. That's ridiculous. After a warning call, the bomb finally detonated at 1:30 a.m., demolishing the restroom, heavily damaging an adjacent barbershop, and blowing out windows in a Senate dining room down a corridor. Damage was estimated at $300,000. On ABC News, anchorman Howard K. Smith noted that it was the first attack on the Capitol since the British burned it in 1891. Well, how very interesting, attacking the Capitol. You know, it's almost like, again, the patterns, the cycle continues, attacking the Capitol seems to be something that revisionist groups have a tendency to do. Yeah, except nobody at the electoral justice protest of Jan 6th had any intention of burning the place down, blowing it up. Much like the bombing of New York Police headquarters 9 months earlier, the Capitol bombing had a lasting and dramatic impact on security measures in Washington. For the first time, Capitol Police began inspecting all purses and parcels brought into the building. All employees were issued photo identification cards. Gallery attendants received training in identifying suspicious persons. Seldom used nooks and corridors were closed off. In the following year, the Capitol Police Force was increased in size to 1,000 officers from 622. Patronage appointments, until then routine, were stopped. Training was formalized. The department purchased its first bomb-sniffing dogs. The roving prosecutor, Guy Goodwin, was brought in to lead a grand jury investigation of the bombing. It turned into a fiasco. In a flurry of headlines, a 19-year-old demonstrator named Leslie Bacon was arrested, and later released, while several of her friends, including the Yippie activists Stu Alpert and Judy Gumbo, who were subpoenaed to testify. Gumbo, what a strange name. Imagine being named after a soup. Gumbo. There can't be her real name. I gotta look this up. That's gotta be a pseudonym. Gumbo appeared with the Weather Underground logo, a neon rainbow painted on her forehead. Alpert wore a sequined dress with an applique spelling out Bernardine. Yet another Yippie, noting that Goodwin was looking for urban guerrillas, showed up in a gorilla suit. In the end, no indictments were returned. "We didn't do it," Gumbo said when asked about the bombing, "but we dug it." I mean, you can also see the shitposting nature of the thing. Like, oh, I don't take authorities seriously. It's very interesting how the left used to have humor, and now the right does. Again, I think that's another aspect of positionality. You know, it's interesting, too. I want to dwell on the rainbow question. If you haven't ever seen the Weather Underground's logo, I highly recommend that you do. Because if you look at the... oh, wow, there's a... I'm looking this up right now. So there's actually a weather service that is also based in San Francisco called the Weather Underground. And conveniently enough, its logo is also in rainbow colors, which is very interesting. How absolutely fascinating. Right, and if you look at the Weather Underground's logo, you can see it is quite literally in the shape of a stylized rainbow with an arrow through it. Right, and there's even like pictures of this in color, but a lot of times you won't find it. There's red and black ones, which are the more ferocious looking ones. The softer tone, actual rainbow color is also present, but seems less common in the photos that I'm looking here up on Google. But it reminds me of just leftist terrorist groups in general, right? Far left groups always seem to use the rainbow as a symbol. It's very fascinating how that is the case. And I've seen good takes on this, and I've never quite been able to understand fully myself what the reason for this is. If anybody has any ideas, please let me know. But it just reminds me, because you have every single like leftist or historical revisionist group, famously the Peasants' Rebellion led by Thomas Müntzer in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance period, which is deeply Anabaptist and anti-clerical, and a reversion of hierarchy, also famously used a rainbow as their symbol. And the there's another group I'm forgetting. There's another really famous one. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is now. There's another religious affiliation group who has that symbol. That's not just Thomas Munzer. But yeah, anyway, it's very interesting how the rainbow symbol pops up with these sorts of historical underground terrorist groups all the time, and that's like an archetypical symbol that just comes up over and over and over again. It definitely fascinates me for sure. But of course, it just tells you that the rainbow symbol as the penultimate symbol for the left is an accurate one, because that is quite literally the symbol that they chose 50 or 60 years ago. And it's not going to go away anytime soon, because the current generation of leftist leadership are these people in this book right now. Like Bernardine Dorn is a college professor right now. Like she still lectures. Her husband, Bill Ayers, is also a college professor. A lot of these people are still running around. They have not gone away or disappeared by any means, right? Very interesting. Days after the Capitol bombing, Jones and Dorn returned to San Francisco with no sense that the FBI knew their identities or that agents were searching for Jones's truck. But as luck would have it, it wasn't the truck that got them into trouble. It was a single, innocuous money order for all $650. It came from Dorn's friend, Dennis Cunningham. On the morning of Thursday, March 4th, the Chicago attorney walked into a Western Union office on West North Avenue and slid a wad of cash, $650 as he recalls, to the clerk. He used a fake name, Herman Schaefer, as he had done before, to send a money order to a Dwayne Lee Compton in San Francisco. Afterward, he returned to his office, unaware he was being watched by FBI agents. Within minutes, word was relayed to the Bureau in San Francisco, where dozens of agents were pursuing Weatherman leads. None had any evidence the money order was connected to the underground. Much less knew who Dwayne Lee Compton was. Most agents assumed he must be some above-ground supporter. We were going to set up a surveillance, recalls one agent, Max Noel, now retired. The theory was they would send an above-ground person and we would follow them. This was the only plan. When we questioned this, the fact that there was no secondary plan if a fugitive arrived, the supervisors poo-pooed the idea and told us not to worry. I mean, what just sheer incompetence. Like, no plan B whatsoever. No contingency planning. By early afternoon, a team of agents was in place at a Western Union office on Market Street in downtown San Francisco. One worked the counter. Another stood ready in a back room with a camera. 2 or 3 beards, long-haired street agents, lingered in the lobby, while 2 more teams sat in cars outside. For hours they waited. No one appeared. Finally, at 7:30 that evening, a customer asked for the money order from Chicago. He was a young man, tall and blond, with a bushy beard. At first glance, several agents thought it might be Jeff Jones himself. As the man left, 2 of the beards bumped into him. Afterward, both whispered into their radios that it was Jones. Chaos erupted among the FBI contingent. Jones was a top 10 fugitive on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list. And there were strict rules for arresting a top 10. FBI regs say an SAC must be present to arrest a top 10, Max Noel recalls. If he isn't, we would have to explain it to headquarters. So it was total turmoil deciding what to do. As the agents argued, the man who might be Jeff Jones stepped into a waiting Volvo sedan. The lone disparity between versions of this incident involves what car was being driven. Jones remembers he was driving Susie Q. The 3 FBI agents present that day recall he was driving a Volvo sedan. Okay, so that's an interesting footnote there. Behind the wheel, the agents could see a young woman. Some thought it was Kathy Wilkerson. It wasn't. It was Bernardine Dorn. I mean, they almost got the leadership cadre of these people. They almost got them. They had just sprung the trap. They would have gotten the whole thing and shut it down. As Jones remembered that day years later, he and Dorn had just finished a meeting in the Tenderloin district and were on their way to meet Bill Ayers for dinner at a Chinese restaurant. Stepping into the Western Union office, Jones immediately sensed that something was amiss. 3 men were lounging inside, wearing what he sized up as hippie attire straight out of a dinner theater production of Hair. As he took his place in line, his mind raced. Were they FBI? If they knew who he was, he would already be under arrest. If they didn't and he ran, they would be suspicious. He waited as the line inched forward. In a back office, an FBI agent began snapping photographs. When his turn came, Jones slipped his driver's license under the glass and received his money. He stepped outside onto the sidewalk, keeping his head. Sliding into the car, he turned to Dorn. There were 3 guys in there, and I didn't like the looks of them, he said. She told him a man had just walked by and glanced at their license plate. As they pulled from the curb, Jones stared in the rearview mirror. He saw a black sedan ease from its parking space, take a slow U-turn, and begin to follow them. Oh, that's very ominous. Getting followed by a black sedan. Then the parade began, Max Noel continues. Neither the pursued nor the pursuers, however, were entirely sure this was real. The agents weren't certain who they were following, and Jones and Dorn weren't certain they were being followed. Unsure, Dorn drove north from Market, then turned left onto California Street. One FBI car trailed behind, while 2 others drove parallel streets. The procession continued for several blocks until Dorn, taking no chances, suddenly took a sharp left turn onto Mason Street. The FBI car behind her, caught unawares, stopped at the light, then radioed to the 2 other cars to take up the pursuit. In the resulting confusion, neither was able to spot the speeding Volvo. They lost him, Noel recalls. It was the first time anyone in the FBI had so much as laid eyes on Weatherman's leadership in more than a year. It was shattering, Noel continues. So afterward, everybody came back to the office. The supervisors said it couldn't have possibly been Jeff Jones. Then they developed the film, looked at the photos, and said, "It sure looks like Jeff Jones." Yeah, no shit. We had his prints from Western Union, and finally the fingerprint guy came and ID'd it as Jones. Well, you can imagine the uproar. The concern was how we explain this to headquarters. As agents debated what to do, Jones and Dorn met Bill Ayers and other friends at the restaurant. Safely inside, Jones began to doubt himself. It was not at all clear that they had been pursued. The men at Western Union couldn't really have been FBI agents, could they? He told himself he was being paranoid. Still, once dinner concluded, Jones suggested to John Willard Davis that they switch cars. Handing him the keys, Jones and Dorn took Davis's car home. At least you can give credit to these people for having the presence of mind to switch vehicles, at least. By this time, it was evening, Max Noel continues. So we start this huge canvass around the 1,000 block of California at Mason, where the car was lost. Then one of the agents leaving to go home, driving down Market, he sees the Volvo parked right outside a laundry. They set up a surveillance on the vehicle. The stakeout began at 11. A few minutes after midnight, agents saw a young man walk up and unlock the car. It was Davis. Agents leaped from their cars and rushed him, guns drawn. Davis raised his hands and went peacefully. They took him to the Hall of Justice, where, during hours of questioning, he denied knowing anyone named Jeff Jones. The Volvo, he insisted, belonged to his parents, which the FBI confirmed. So they had to release him the following morning, Noel says. We watched him walk up to a payphone on Van Ness and start making calls, obviously warning everyone. Everyone in the office was assigned to saturate that neighborhood up on California and Mason. We knocked on every door, but it was fruitless. Nothing came of it. When Jeff Jones heard what happened, he realized the danger they were in. He had registered a car using the same name he used to pay the electric bill for the Pine Street apartment. It was only a matter of time, he suspected, before the FBI made the connection and raided the apartment. He realized that Weather's entire Bay Area infrastructure, the fake IDs, their cars, the apartments, was tainted. He telephoned Pine Street and told everyone to leave immediately. They did so, leaving their belongings behind. Years later, remembering an episode that came to be known in Weather lore as the Encirclement, some of those involved would recall running out just as FBI agents stormed the flat. I mean, these people are a bunch of schizos, man. Like, just false memories. That wasn't the way it happened. In fact, despite knocking on every door in the neighborhood, the FBI didn't find the connection. A week later, however, a Chinese-American landlord telephoned the San Francisco office saying a group of young white people had disappeared from an apartment he owned at 1038 Pine Street. When he pushed his way inside, he found what appeared to be bomb-making equipment. Max Noel and 3 other agents were at the apartment within the hour. We found what was essentially their West Coast bomb factory, Noel recalls. There were stacks of communist, Cuban, and anti-government literature, Maoist tracts, disguise kits, and lots of bomb-making equipment, pliers and wires and pipes and tools. One big block of C4 plastic explosive. We called in the bomb squad. Agents later identified fingerprints taken from the apartment as those of every significant weatherman believed to be on the West Coast. Not that it mattered. They were all gone. The day after the FBI almost captured Dorn and Jones, Friday, March 5th, 1971, people began gathering in New York for the one-year anniversary of the townhouse. Down on 11th Street, the rubble of the Wilkerson residence had been cleared. All that remained was a vacant lot fronted by a high pylon plywood barrier. Someone had painted the words Weatherman Park across the top. Beneath it hung a few posters and hastily scrawled slogans. Power to the underground, read one. The next afternoon, Abby Hoffman led a procession up Fifth Avenue from Washington Square. Everyone gathered in front of the townhouse. Terry, Teddy, and Diana were fighting to make this a free country, which it's not, Hoffman told the crowd. They saw the nature of the beast imperialism and were ready to give their lives to destroy it. They paid the ultimate sacrifice. They made a mistake. They weren't careful with explosives. From now on, we've got to be careful. I mean, even at this point, the anachronism of the left is on full display because, like, imperialism is over, right? The Vietnam War is drawing down. There's no like imperial government anywhere in the world really at this point. And by the end of the 1960s and 70s, like any Western like direct imperial control is just over. All African, all East Asian nations all would have self-government by this point. So it's just completely retarded and like really behind the times. It was the last anyone would hear of the Weather Underground for months. What none of the protesters gathered at Weatherman Park that day realized, however, was that an entirely new front of the underground struggle was poised to open, one that was far more desperate and far more deadly. It happened barely 60 days later, on the far side of Manhattan. And that is the end of the chapter. Thank you all for watching. We are going to move on to part 2 of this book sometime in the next week. And the next part is going to actually deal with the BLA, the Black Liberation Army. And just to give you an idea of the title of the next chapter, it is called An Army of Angry Niggas. And that's a direct quote. So it is certainly going to be very entertaining. Of course, as usual, I will get my shillings out of the way. Please subscribe, like, comment, share this video if it's of interest to you. You can patronize me on Buy Me a Coffee, or you can subscribe to my Substack. Usually my articles on Substack make their way to this channel eventually, so those are my monetization paths. It's greatly appreciated, any support. Should be, let's say next week, next Tuesday or Wednesday would probably be good for the next chapter of this. So do stay tuned. Hopefully I can bring on a guest for that one. I don't really like these single streams, but this was a very short chapter for this book anyway. So I just wanted to get it knocked out and out of the way. So yes, stay tuned. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.